heat these tubes up so that this process works really well. If you want to learn about this, you can definitely go read up about it online. I know that's exactly what I did to tell you all this stuff today. Because I personally haven't purchased one of these and I don't necessarily plan to. They're pretty expensive, they're super inefficient, get really hot, and they color the sound in very much the same way all the time. So once you hear one, you can switch the tubes out and they'll sound differently if you're super into it, but it's not necessarily something that I find interesting. A lot of people say that they pair well with vinyl, and that's because they were basically born together. It's like you separate two twins and then they meet like halfway in their life. It's like they're gonna be in love or something. Who knows? All right, so moving on, we're gonna get to digital to analog converters. That's those things I've been talking about. You need a super high quality one to get great sound. Luckily, these super high quality ones made by that same Northwest Audio guy I mentioned earlier can be super inexpensive but still do an amazing job. And to some people's testimony, they do such a good job that there's really not anything better. So the one pictured in the image up there is the same one that I have down there, but it's the back side of it, and you can see different connections. On a basic level, this takes ones and zeros and makes it into actual waveforms that will travel through your wires. And it's going to do that usually through USB. Sometimes it'll do it through optical. Those are the two most common. You'll also see a coaxial cable over there, which is just a digital form of copper communication. And the two that I tend to use, USB and optical, are generally used most of the time. Coaxial is used rarely, and I think the number one thing it's used for would be like subwoofers in home theaters, and Alex might be able to tell you some other uses for it, being a sound guy himself. But most of the time you'll deal with USB or optical, which actually uses light. Let's see. So there's a DAC in your phone, there's a DAC in your laptop, and they're both probably terrible. And luckily for you, you can get other ones if you want, like the portable guy down there. The little red box, that's got a DAC in it as well. That's completely discrete, separate from the phone. You plug in your phone using USB, and it will actually convert even stream tracks. Like I stream through Apple Music, so I'll take those stream tracks, I'll transport the file itself over to the DAC, which will then convert it into what is the analog signal that you actually amplify and hear. Whew. And the better your DAC, the more detail you're able to hear. The better it's able to reproduce that sound from a digital form into what is actually the analog form in a quality way. There's a couple of different paradigms that I'm not going to go into, multi-bit versus sigma delta. Most stacks are sigma delta, the ones in your phones are sigma delta. Multi-bit is an older form that is harder to manufacture and more expensive to do, but some people claim it's better. PCM versus DSD. PCM is what most things use. It's probably what you use on your daily basis. DSD is a new way to transport files from your source to the DAC itself. Some people claim it sounds better. Some people don't necessarily have an opinion. I won't get into them because they're not that important. One other thing I want to talk about, which Alex has to go through all the time, being that he transports signals from one side of the playhouse to another, is balanced wiring. So balanced wiring comes in when you actually need to take one thing from point A to point B over a long distance. And that is going to introduce some noise, most likely, when you run that cable through the walls and by all your power cables and maybe through your cell phone interference and stuff like that. So it actually takes the signal, flips it, and then transports both of them through what is hopefully exactly the same noise, such that the other side, simple circuitry, can combine them back together, and anything that wasn't there to begin with when they were split and flipped will be the same waveform. So you can see how this is one way, this is opposite, and then these are the same. The output, when it's combined back again, is actually going to be able to subtract all that new information by canceling one when you flip it back with another set of noise. So that's a pretty crude way to talk about it, but what it does is it gets rid of all the noise, and by sending two signals instead of one, you get a completely clean and transparent connection between the one and the other. And you can see here some images about how it works and how it is actually going to get rid of that through different Oh, and there's no need for this for most applications. Regular headphones will use balanced, unbalanced. Everything I have on the table there is unbalanced. One source signal and a ground, and that's it. That's all you need. The amount of noise that's introduced is so minimal you probably can't hear it, especially from dedicated discrete devices. Most of the noise ratio is going to be like 85 and above decibels, which is like minus 85 from whatever it is you're playing, or more, which is like, if you can hear negative 85, you're a trained ear, and if you can hear negative 100, you're a super human, I guess. Like, that's just crazy. Here's some other connections that you may or may not have seen. So here's your typical quarter-inch or eighth-inch connectors, and they come in different flavors. So if you've ever seen your iPhone or maybe Samsung or whatever headphones with a mic in them, it actually uses this one over here called TRRS. And that is actually able to transport a ground, a microphone source, and then also a left and a right channel, all together through the headphone cable. The problem with this is that the mic and the headphones are going to share a ground. So if you want to try to connect that microphone to another device from your headphones are being connected to. So for example, I want to plug in my microphone into my PC, but I want to plug in the headphones to my amplifier down there. It's going to create a ground loop, and your ears are not going to be very happy because it's going to hum. If you want to learn more about that, you can totally Google it, but it's pretty complicated. I'm not really going to explain it now. Up here is the optical cable. You can see this is a mini toss link, and this is a full toss link. Basically, it makes the light go through and transmit ones and zeros. Very similar to how that noise. Very similar to how networking works with fiber optics. And over here is an XLR cable. Alex is very familiar with these because they're used in professional settings. It's almost always balanced, if not always a balanced connection. And it's really big, but it's always going to be easy to work with and a little bit more substantial of a cable. Most of the time these are very thick cables. And they're able to transport that balanced signal without a lot of noise interference. So not only does it use the balance to be able to filter that, it also uses shielding for precaution, just like most cables do, but in this case it's a rather large cable, so it can use a bit more. It's also used for connecting wires on through long distances because you need a larger size wire, larger gauge wire. Down here is RCA. This is probably the most common interconnect besides the 3.5 millimeter jacks, which you're used to in your phones and headphones. RCA is used for pretty much everything else behind the scenes. It's also called component sometimes. RCA probably made it. That's probably why we call it RCA. And usually that's a ground and a source per cable. So red and white is going to be your left and right. And they're both going to go over their separate wires with separate cables. So now we're actually getting to the point where we've talked about a lot of sound. We've gone for quite a long time here, so we're going to hopefully try to speed through this part a little bit. But this is more of the actual numbers behind everything and how things sound, but in a visual way. So here we have the frequency response curve, which is probably going to be, oh, it's not that bad. It's pretty good to see. It's for those Sennheiser HD600s I had up earlier, those very open headphones. Here you can see on this curve exactly what's going on with how they sound. So this graph is a measurement of amplitude on the y-axis versus frequency on the x-axis. So frequency is going to be the actual sound that's being made between usually 20 and 20k hertz. So that's your treble versus your bass. That's your mids versus your sub bass. That's all that stuff is separate. So generally here, all the way down to however low you want, to somewhere around here or so is your sub bass. From here to somewhere around here is your bass. So that's right here. This is like so sub bass is like when you can feel it in your bones. That's sub bass. Bass is like when you can hear it and it's like, that's bassy. And then a lot of the times above that, you're going to hear your lower mids, which are going to be around here, and upper mids, which are around here, all the way up to vocals, which is where the treble's going to start. So around here or so, you're going to get your treble starting all the way up to here, where it's up to 20,000 hertz, where you probably can't even hear. So with that breakdown in mind, You can see here that the sub bass, specifically, here's each line is a specific interval, and when you've read enough of these graphs, you'll kind of realize them. So I'll try to help you out here. This is going to be the 20 hertz line. So you can see here, if you trace it over here, it's actually -5 versus this 0 line. Now, all of these, this whole line is relative in decibels. So if something is around 6 decibels difference from something else, then the one that's 6 decibels higher will sound about twice as loud. So when you have things that are more than 3, it's something the average human can actually decipher and be like, oh wow, like that's a pretty noticeable difference if they're really listening. And if it's 6, you'll be like, wow, I can't even hear the other thing, like what's going on? Some headphones are going to go all the way up to like 10 or 15 decibels difference between some of the different parts of the sound. And when you get that high, it's a very noticeable sound signature difference. So to go through what's going on here, we can determine that the Sennheiser HG600 has a sub-bass that rolls off, meaning that from the bass, it's actually going to roll down instead of up or staying flat. If the headphone was perfectly at 0 all the way across, it would be perfectly flat. That's something that doesn't exist. To my knowledge, nobody's ever been able to perfectly do that. Get damn close when you start spending really serious amounts of money on headphones and materials that can really do exactly what they're supposed to do to make this exactly flat and convey exactly what was recorded. But headphones are going to generally color it, like I mentioned earlier, in one way or another. So here we have a bass that's pretty heavy and definitely substantial, but the sub bass is relatively lower compared to the bass. So this means that you won't hear that bass that shakes you, but you will hear a lot of that bass that's in your ears. And you're definitely going to hear it over something like some of the mids if you're really trained, because this difference to this down here is only about 3 to 5 decibels, which is noticeable but not the worst. So a sound that's played at this frequency in general is going to sound lower in volume than this at the same level with your volume knob on your amplification. So doing nothing else to the headphone, it's going to sound a little bit lower here than it will here. And as it goes up, you can see it kind of gets really wavy. This kind of waviness is seriously noticeable to a trained ear with a headphone.